Hi, I'm Nancy, and I'm going to be sharing mental illness and the effects on the brain for my STEM Fair project. This is an overview of my project and an abstract that discusses what I hope to achieve throughout my presentation. And these are some goals I have for the presentation that I can hopefully help you understand and what I learned through researching this project. And I hope to define the connection between mental illness and the brain and hope to get a deeper understanding on how mental illness affects daily functions through neuroanatomy and neuroscience, and how a person with mental illness is different from a person that does not have mental illness. So to understand the connection between mental illness and the human brain, we got to understand what mental illness is first. So mental illness is a health condition that changes a person's thinking, feelings, and behavior. Some examples of mental illness could be anxiety disorders, bipolar disorders, depression, OCD, PTSD, paranoia, and ADHD. And some symptoms could be feeling down, confused, excessive thought, withdrawal from close people, tiredness, high or low moods, changes in sleeping schedules and habits, alcohol or drug abuse. But we gotta know that these symptoms and these examples of mental illnesses are not all. These are just some examples that we see very often in our modern day society. Because mental illness is such a broad topic and it's so diverse that everyone could have different symptoms and different diseases. 1 in 4 people are affected by mental illness indirectly or directly. And it's hard to tell if someone has mental illness or if they don't, because not everyone shows the same symptoms. Before I go into the human brain, I would like to discuss the difference between mental illness and brain disease. Some people get these mixed up, and it is very important that we don't get these mixed up because these are very different things. So mental illness is a mental and emotional impact on the brain. Not exactly like brain disease, which is like deterioration and puncture in the brain. Brain disease examples are like epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease. These are examples of when the brain is maybe deteriorating and physically breaking down, versus mental illness. It's a mental and emotional stigmata in the brain, which still affects the human, but it is very different in ways. Because brain disease, you could have fatigue, slurring of speech, because it's physically affecting the brain and destroying the neurons. Versus mental illness, the brain is not exactly being destroyed and deteriorated, but it is being impacted by the low serotonin and dopamine levels, which we will get into later. Now, going to the brain. The brain is very, very incredible in terms of that you don't even think about how your brain functions, carrying out your day-to-day functions in your daily life. And like you walking around, you don't think about that, but your brain is transferring signals down to your spine telling you to walk. And that is truly incredible considering how small our brain is compared to our body. So what is a neuron? It is a nerve cell that has dendrites that receive signals and axons that transmit signals to other neurons. So a neuron has 4 regions: the cell body, dendrites, axons, and axon terminals. The cell body is the metabolic center of the neuron, which the nucleus lays, and protein synthesis occurs in this area. Going to dendrites first, they have branch-looking parts that receive signals from axons. And axons, they carry signals to other cells. And some axons are actually supported by myelin, which is like a fatty supportive layer that makes electrical signals travel faster. And finally, axon terminals. These are axons at the end of the neuron that divides into branches, which are known as axon terminals. And so basically, dendrites take the messages from axon terminals and they go into a synapse. There is a presynaptic neuron, which are neurons that send out information, and postsynaptic neuron that receives information. And what a cool fact is that there are more synapses than the stars in our galaxy. So there are very, very many. And there's hundreds of billions of neurons in our brain. And that is incredible to think about. So when electrical impulses reaches the presynaptic axon terminal, the vesicles, which are membranous sacs that move toward the membrane of the axis terminal, they bind with the membrane and release the contents and the molecules that are in the brain known as neurotransmitters. These are known as serotonin, dopamine, GABA, and there's a few more. And these neurotransmitters are binded to special proteins known as receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. So the fusion of the neurotransmitters and the receptors causes an electrical impulse that moves away from the dendrite. After the electrical impulse is stimulated, it is released into the synaptic space, and proteins known as transporters carry the neurotransmitter back into the presynaptic neuron. And this process occurs repeatedly, time after time, same process. And so these neurotransmitters include glutamate, serotonin, dopamine, and there are so many. So discussing the connection between the human brain and mental illness. So most scientists have found and believe that mental illness results from miscommunication between the neurons and neurotransmission. So when the neurons don't transmit enough serotonin or dopamine into the brain, that causes an imbalance, which causes these mental illnesses. And so these imbalances cause the mental illness, and there are like serotonin deficiencies or dopamine deficiencies. And it makes sense because when serotonin levels are lower, serotonin is like controls the moods and emotions. And so when serotonin levels are lower, it causes depression because you are not feeling the energy and your emotions are down. And now discussing dopamine. Dopamine is the desire, craving, pleasure, and like happiness, euphoric feelings. And, people who do drugs, they get this high. This high is from dopamine. And it makes sense because when those people don't get their dopamine, they feel down, they feel sad, they don't feel normal. One thing I also want to discuss is gray matter. Gray matter is tissues that make up neurons, or that have neurons, and these tissues are deteriorated sometimes when people have mental illness. And so people with mental disorders, they have research that they have less gray matter, and they lose the gray matter due to the imbalance. They also have found that mental illnesses lay in the three regions, which are the cortex, the right insula, and the left insula. This picture of the brain really sums up our discussion for today. So the left, the one with the less yellow, is a picture of a PET scan of someone with depression, versus on the other side with the more yellow, it's with someone without depression. So we can see that people without depression have more brain activity versus than those who do have depression, and that's understood because they have lower serotonin levels, which lowers their activity levels, and that really sums up what we discussed today through serotonin, dopamine, and how mental illness connects to the human brain. I am so happy that you joined me today, and I am so happy that you got to listen to my project, and I hope you took something away from it and learned something. Thank you so much.